Right now you might feel as though you are standing in the center of a crowded room. But the people watching you are not there at all. They are echoes, remnants of voices from years ago, critiques that have settled into the stones of your mind, and the persistent, nagging feeling that you are performing for an audience that vanished long ago. You carry the weight of their gaze, adjusting your words, your posture, and even your thoughts, hoping to satisfy a standard that no longer has any place in your life. The air in this room is cool, perhaps stirred by the slow, rhythmic hum of a fan or the faint, distant rustle of leaves outside your window. But inside, the atmosphere is heavy with the resonance of those unseen internal spectators. You have spent so much energy trying to refine your performance, trying to ensure that the thoughts you entertain are polite, organized, and acceptable, that you have forgotten how to simply inhabit the space of your own mind without the need for an audience. You are not broken because your mind has become an echo chamber. You are not failing because you still hear the voices of the past critiquing your present choices. You are simply someone who has lived with the door locked for too long. And tonight, we will not try to force the mind into a sudden, artificial silence, for that is just another way of performing. We will not try to shout down the echoes, nor will we try to shame them for existing. Instead, we will learn why your constant effort to appease these internal ghosts is exactly what prevents you from finding the rest you deserve. The truth is, your mind does not become quiet because you successfully manage the echoes. It becomes quiet when you realize you are the space in which they occur, and that space itself is already untouched by the sound. Your attempt to control the resonance is what creates the fatigue you feel in your chest. You believe that your vigilance is a way of staying safe, but it is actually the source of your exhaustion. Tonight, we move toward a different understanding. We will learn that the walls of the chamber are not you, and the echoes are not the truth. You are safe enough to soften. Nothing is required of you here. There is no stage to maintain, no audience to appease, and no judgment to fear. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. You only need to exist within the quiet, allowing the walls of your awareness to simply stand, while you turn your gaze toward the possibility of an open window. Imagine, if you will, the sensation of standing in a hall built of smooth, ancient stone. For years, you have stood here, speaking and moving, believing that every sound you make must be perfect, because every sound bounces back to you, amplified and constant. You have been so busy listening to the rebound of your own actions that you have lost the sense of your own voice. You have been monitoring the feedback, checking the volume, and trying to dampen the noise, convinced that if you could just find the right tone, the room would finally stop repeating it back to you. But the hall is built to echo. The stone is built to hold sound. Your struggle is not with the hall. It is with the belief that you must be the one to harmonize with the ghost of every sound you have ever made. Perhaps you have felt this precise weight before. It is the feeling of walking through your day, constantly reviewing your interactions, asking yourself if you were enough, if you sounded right, or if you were seen in the way you hoped to be seen. You treat your inner life as if it were a rehearsal for a play that never ends, a place where no slip-up is allowed to fade into the background. But even as you hold your breath, trying to keep the internal chamber still, life continues to breathe. The world moves, the shadows shift, and the night arrives. Regardless of how much you try to police the echoes of your own history, it is a curious paradox, is it not? You seek validation through this internal monitoring. Yet the monitoring itself is the very thing that keeps you from feeling validated. When you try to sculpt your thoughts into a permanent state of approval, you are essentially trying to catch the sound of the wind in a jar. The desire for a perfectly resonance-free mind is a form of suffering that you add to the reality of your day. The first pain is the natural human need to belong. The second pain is the exhausting audition you conduct within your own skull, trying to prove your worth to figures who have long since left the room. Tonight we are going to set aside the audition. We are going to allow the echoes to exist, not because we have given up on ourselves, but because we have finally understood that the echoes do not define the room. Take a slow, gentle breath and let it go. There is no hurry. As you settle into your space, notice the weight of your body pressing against the support beneath you. Feel the release in your shoulders, the slow, rhythmic softening of your hands, and the way your heartbeat begins to find a rhythm more in tune with the quiet night. You are not being asked to change anything. You are only being invited to witness. When a thought arrives, a memory of a critique, a fear of being judged, a phantom expectation, let it arrive. Do not feel the need to reach for the controls to dampen the sound. Let it echo. It cannot command you unless you decide to give it a seat of honor. In a moment, we will look into the story of a musician who spent his entire life trying to play the perfect note, only to find that his most significant music came from the wind he had been trying to block out. This is a story about the transition from being a performer in an echo chamber to being the vast open space that houses both sound and silence. But for now, just stay here with the weight of your own breath. You are safe. The world outside is drifting into the deep, dark calm of the midnight hour. And here, in this internal sanctuary, you are finally allowed to put down the heavy burden of your reputation. You are allowed to be, for a little while, entirely unobserved. The walls of your mind are standing, but they are not the truth. The truth is the air that flows through, the space that remains when the sound has faded. Allow yourself to rest in the middle of this vast, silent, and untamed reality. Your only task tonight is to breathe, to soften, and to let the windows of your heart be open to the night. In a mountain temple reached only by a narrow path that climbed through the clouds, there lived a musician whose life was entirely dedicated to the flute. He believed that if he could master the instrument, he could finally find the perfect resonance, a sound so pure that it would silence the constant, critical chattering of his own mind. He had spent years in that high-altitude sanctuary, building for himself a small room with stone walls, thick and windowless, designed specifically to capture every nuance of the notes he played. He wanted to hear exactly how he sounded, convinced that if he could analyze the perfection of his performance, he would finally earn the inner peace he so desperately craved. The musician was a man who lived in a state of perpetual audition. Every time he raised the bamboo flute to his lips, he was not merely playing for the joy of the melody, he was playing for the judgment of the echoes. He would blow a single, clear note and wait with bated breath as it struck the hard, cold stone of the chamber. When the sound bounced back to him, he would immediately search it for flaws. He would hear a slight tremor, a hint of hesitation, or a breath that seemed too sharp, and he would take that echo as a direct criticism of his own character. He believed the chamber was telling him he was not good enough, not skilled enough, and certainly not calm enough. The silence between his performances was not a relief, it was a period of intense review. He would stand in the dim light of the temple, his brow furrowed, his fingers gripping the worn wood of the instrument, until his knuckles turned white. He was convinced that the room was judging him, even though the room was only stone. The echo, which should have been a simple physical consequence of sound, had become a voice of authority. He had given his power to the rebound. He had made the chamber the master of his inner state, and the more he played, the more he felt like a servant to the very noise he was creating. One afternoon, an old temple keeper, a man who spoke very little, and whose presence seemed to carry the stillness of the deep woods, entered the chamber. He did not look at the musician. He walked directly to the far wall, where a small, iron-barred window had been painted over and sealed shut generations ago, ostensibly to keep the temple acoustics perfect. The keeper began to scrape away the layers of old, brittle paint with a small, flat tool. The sound was dry and grating, a harsh interruption to the heavy silence the musician had been cultivating. The musician stopped playing and asked the keeper what he was doing, his voice tight with the frustration of a man whose sanctuary was being violated. The keeper did not answer. He continued to scrape, his movements slow and deliberate, until the iron frame of the window was revealed. Then, with a grunt of exertion, he turned a heavy rusted key in the lock, and the window creaked open. Instantly, the atmosphere of the room changed. The stagnant, heavy air that had held the echoes in place was replaced by a sharp, invigorating gust of mountain wind. The sound of the wind, however, was not like the sound of the flute. It was erratic, wild, and entirely indifferent to the musician's need for order. It whistled through the opening, creating a chaotic, rushing noise that seemed to collide with the walls of the chamber. The musician flinched. He felt as though his temple of perfection had been invaded. He looked at the keeper, expecting him to explain why he had let the wind destroy the carefully curated acoustics. But the keeper simply placed the iron key on the floor near the musician's feet. He walked to the center of the room and gestured for the musician to play his flute one more time, but to play it with the window wide open. The musician hesitated. He felt exposed. He was used to the controlled, predictable feedback of the sealed room, and the prospect of playing while the wind was rushing through felt like a recipe for discord. But he was curious, and there was a strange invitation in the way the cool air touched his skin. He raised the flute to his lips and played a note. This time, the sound of his flute was met by the sound of the wind. They blended, they clashed, and they moved together. The echo did not return to him as a clear, solitary sound that he could analyze. It was caught up in the gust, broken apart and scattered into the air. He stopped, his heart racing. He waited for the judgment. He waited for the echo to tell him how he had done. But there was only the sound of the wind and the gentle swaying of the trees outside. The chamber was no longer an echo chamber. It was a bridge between the inside and the outside. The musician realized that he had spent his life trying to hear himself, but all he had really been doing was eavesdropping on his own fear. The keeper walked over to the musician and, without a word, reached out to take the flute from him. He did not play it. He simply held it for a moment, letting the cool wind wash over the wood, and then he handed it back. In that simple, quiet exchange, the musician felt the heavy, phantom weight of his own self-judgment begin to lift. He realized that the music was never about the perfection of the note, it was about the honesty of the breath. He had been so focused on the return of the sound that he had forgotten to simply be the source of it. He sat down on the cold stone floor, not to practice, and not to review his performance, but simply to sit and listen to the mountain wind blowing through the temple. For the first time in his life, the room was not telling him who he was, and that was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. This story is not suggesting that you discard your sensitivity or strive to become a person who no longer feels the sharp edges of life. It is not asking you to become a hollow vessel, cold and unresponsive to the world. To live fully is to experience the depth of joy, the sting of loss, and the complexity of caring instead. The musician's journey invites us to look at the way our own minds construct an internal audience that never leaves. The suffering he endured was not caused by the music itself, nor was it caused by the wind that eventually swept through the room. His suffering was built upon the desperate, exhausting belief that he had to be the master of his own feedback. He believed that if he could only ensure his performance was perfect, he could finally silence the criticism he heard rebounding off the walls. Buddhist wisdom often speaks of this as a layered experience. The first pain is the reality of our lives, the mistakes we make, the awkwardness we feel, the moments of uncertainty, and the times we fall short of our own expectations. That is simply the nature of existence. But the second pain, the one that keeps you awake in the dark, is the one we inflict upon ourselves when we judge the reality of our lives. It is the story we tell ourselves about why those things happened. When you look at the echoes inside your own mind, your self-criticism, your replay of past errors, your fear of being seen, you are often adding that second wound. You hear a thought, and you immediately decide that it is a direct report on your value as a person. You try to manage the sound, to curate the feedback, and to ensure that the room only ever tells you that you are doing fine. But think of the flute in the story. The flute did not struggle to hold the note still. It did not try to stop the wind from interfering with the melody. It simply allowed the sound to move through it. Your mind is meant to be that flute. When you are caught in the loop of wanting to be validated, you are not being a failing person, and you are not being a weak one. You are simply trying to hold the air within your own hands, squeezing tighter and tighter in hope that you can stop it from shifting. But the harder you grip, the more the music is stifled, leaving you only with the tension of the effort. To stop adding that second wound is to begin the process of letting go, not of the music you make, but of the heavy burden of needing the room to approve of your playing. This is not abandonment. It is a profound shift in trust. You are learning to trust that your inner life is vast enough to contain the wind, the discord, the beauty, and the silence, without you needing to stand guard over every single resonance. When you feel that familiar pull to start policing your thoughts at the end of the day, when you feel the urge to go over every interaction, to justify your choices, or to worry about how you were perceived, try to recognize that impulse for what it is. It is a protective reflex, a habit of a heart trying to keep you safe from the sting of external judgment. But tonight, that reflex is no longer needed. You do not have to be the curator of your own reputation within the walls of your own head. You are permitted to move from being the performer in an audition to being the one who dwells within the temple, free to listen to the mountain wind without fear. Think about how much energy you have poured into the defense of your own character. The endless mental rehearsals of how you might have been more articulate, more confident, or more composed. This effort is not evidence of a flaw in you. It is evidence of how much you value being a person who contributes goodness to the world. But even the best intentions can turn into a cage if they are guided by the belief that you must be impeccable to be at peace. The Buddha suggested that the root of our discontent is often found in this very cycle. We crave a future where we are finally beyond reproach. We fear a present where we are seen in our vulnerability. And we resist the truth that vulnerability is the only honest way to exist. You do not need to fight your own echoes. In fact, fighting the echoes is what feeds them, keeping them alive long into the night. If you notice a thought that feels like a harsh judgment, let it exist. Do not reach for the mental tools you use to silence it. Do not try to snap it off or cover it with a better story. Simply recognize it as an echo, acknowledge its presence, and let it occupy its space in the chamber of your awareness. It cannot overtake you unless you decide to become entangled in the sound. By noticing it, you are already creating the space that the keeper showed the musician. You are the open window, and the thoughts are simply the wind. This is the beauty of a gentler way of living. It invites you to stop confusing control with safety. You have been trying to make yourself safe by managing every detail of your inner resonance, but you have found that this leaves you feeling more fragile, not less. True safety is not found in a mind that is sealed shut. True safety is found in a mind that knows it can witness its own noise without becoming lost in it. When you stop fighting the echoes, you realize that the echoes were never attacking you. They were just ripples in the air. And so are you. Your life, with all its beautiful complexity, is not something to be perfected into a static, soundless shape. It is a living experience that is asking for your presence, not your management. Many of us go through our days carrying the invisible weight of these expectations, feeling the phantom pressure of the audience even when we are lying in bed. We worry that if we ever truly let go, the room will be empty, or we will be swept away by the chaos of our own uncurated thoughts. But notice how, even as we speak, the world has not fallen apart. The earth continues its slow, quiet rotation. Your breath continues to move in and out, unbidden and rhythmically. You are held by a larger, quieter grace that does not require you to provide a perfect performance in return. The practice of letting go is not a violent act of discarding. It is the soft, natural motion of a hand, relaxing after a long day of carrying a heavy burden. It is the realization that the burden was not yours to carry in the first place. When you feel the weight of your perceived faults, the weight of the shoulds and oughtos that govern your self-perception, simply acknowledge that they are heavy. Acknowledge that they have been demanding your energy, and then see if you can choose, just for a moment, to set them on the floor. See if you can leave them there, unattended, while you allow your awareness to widen, to become as clear and as open as the mountain air flowing through a freshly unsealed window. This transition from performer to dweller is not a sign of giving up. It is a sign of coming home. You have been a visitor in your own life for a long time, spending all your attention on the acoustics of the building rather than the experience of being inside. Tonight, give yourself permission to be a visitor who no longer feels the need to impress the walls. You are safe here. The silence is not an enemy to be filled. It is the space where you can finally rest. In a short while, we will look at another story, one that explores what happens when we stop trying to paint over the windows of our own hearts. But for now, let the ideas settle into the quiet of your room. You do not need to analyze them, nor do you need to agree with them entirely. You only need to let them rest in your awareness like the wind passing through the trees. The world will hold you. The space is deep enough, and your own heart, even in its weariness, is already vast enough to hold everything that is currently passing through it, without needing to change a single note. Stay with this softness, this recognition that your worth is not a performance to be polished, but a natural, inherent light that was always here, waiting for the windows to be unsealed so that you might finally sit down and watch the evening arrive. There is a sense of release that comes when you stop trying to control how your thoughts sound to the world, and instead, listen to the quiet, steady rhythm of your own soul. You are moving deeper into the night, and with every breath, the walls of the chamber are feeling less like a cage and more like a shelter, a place where you are free to simply be if it feels right. Let your posture shift, allowing yourself to become a vessel for the quietude you have been seeking. You do not need to do anything with the stone walls of your mind. Tonight, there is no requirement to remodel the chamber or to silence the resonance. You are only here to observe the space where the sound occurs. Take a long, slow breath, sensing the air as it moves, cool and steady, into your lungs, and then as you exhale, imagine the tension of your internal performance flowing out with the breath, leaving behind a stillness that belongs entirely to you. You might notice, as the silence deepens, that your mind still feels a flicker of movement, a sudden, unbidden thought about an interaction from earlier today, or perhaps a lingering concern about how you are being perceived by others. This is not a sign that you are failing at being present. It is simply the nature of a mind that has been kept very busy in the service of an audience. Do not try to snap that thought away. Do not reach for the mental tools you have relied on to control the feedback. Instead, simply observe it. Visualize that thought as a sound wave, a vibration hitting the stone wall of your awareness. It is just a sound. It is not an obstacle to your peace. It is merely a ripple in the temple air you are currently moving through. You may gently name this pattern of thinking if you wish. Is it the urge to be liked? Is it the fear of having misunderstood a social cue? Just observe the shape of it. Notice how it tries to demand your attention, pulling at the sleeve of your awareness, insisting that you acknowledge it as truth. Now, imagine yourself standing back in that temple chamber, with the window finally unsealed. Imagine that you are holding this specific worry as if it were a physical object, perhaps a small, smooth pebble that feels cold and heavy. In your mind's eye, slowly move toward the open window. You are not discarding yourself. You are simply placing the weight of that one specific concern down on the sill. You are allowing the mountain air to reach it. Watch what happens when you turn your attention away from that pebble and back toward the vastness of the sky outside. The thought does not disappear, but it loses its power to reverberate against the walls. It becomes a part of the landscape, a small, inconsequential piece of the whole, while you remain free to stand in the center of the room. Notice how the space in your chest feels now that you are not clutching that worry. You might feel a lightness, a subtle shifting in the way your ribs expand with each breath. This is the beginning of the transition. You are not destroying the chamber, you are merely choosing to stop being its captive audience. If another thought arrives, do not feel discouraged. Another echo may sound, or a memory may vibrate through the stone. Just notice it, acknowledge its presence with a gentle, non-judgmental gaze. You do not have to be the one to decide if it is a good thought or a bad one. It is just a sound. If you feel the urge to start analyzing why you are thinking this, simply pause. Feel the cool air on your skin. Remember the feeling of the wind passing through the unsealed window. You are the space, not the echo. You are the temple, not the performer. Even noticing your struggle to remain unbothered is enough. You do not have to force yourself into a state of profound, blank meditation. You do not have to reach a specific level of tranquility to be worthy of rest. The fact that you are here, choosing to sit with your own internal resonance without immediately trying to change it, is already a profound act of wisdom. It is a way of saying to your internal audience, I hear you, I see you, but I do not need to change my performance for you. Return your attention to the feeling of your body against the surface beneath you. Feel the support of the ground, the way the night air rests against your skin. You are held by something much larger than your own ruminations. The mountain does not ask the temple to be soundproof. The sky does not ask the wind to be silent. They simply allow the movement to happen. You can do the same. If your mind wanders, gently guide it back to the sensation of the breath, not by commanding it, but by inviting it, as you would invite a tired traveler to come inside from a long, confusing day. There is no need to rush. The hours of the night are wide and deep. You have nowhere else to be, and there is nothing you have to prove to the silence. Everything that has happened, and everything that has yet to happen, can remain on the other side of this moment. In this space, you are not defined by your social standing, your past errors, or your future potential. You are defined only by your capacity to witness the sounds of your mind without needing to become the person who is being judged. Maybe you can sense the shift occurring right now. As you stop trying to curate the feedback loop, the air in your room might feel a little softer, a little more spacious. This is not because your mind has stopped moving, but because you have stopped trying to trap it. You are practicing the art of simply being present, allowing the echoes of your life to pass through the open window, while you sit in the center of the temple, breathing in the quiet, sharp air of the mountains. Do not worry if you drift or if your focus slips. That is exactly what is supposed to happen in a chamber that has finally been opened to the elements. The mind will move and your awareness will return, over and over again, in a cycle that is as natural as the turning of the seasons. Each time you notice yourself drifting into the habit of reviewing your day, just return to the breath, return to the image of the open window, return to the feeling of your hands empty and at rest, lying on your lap. You are safe enough to let go. You are enough, just as you are, without a single note needing to be perfected or played for an audience. Stay in this softness for a little longer, watching the mountain mist settle over the concerns you have set down, until the temple itself seems to breathe in unison with your own quiet, steady heartbeat. You have spent so much of your life trying to provide the perfect response, and tonight you are finally learning that the silence is a perfectly valid reply. In a different valley, far from the mountain temple, there stood a small village known for its intricate paper lanterns. Among the craftspeople was a woman whose hands were calloused and ink-stained, for she was the village's finest painter of silk. Every evening she would hang her lanterns in the public square, and for years she had relied on the whispers of the villagers to tell her if her work was truly beautiful. She had become obsessed with the echoes of their opinions. If a passerby mentioned that the blue of a painted lotus looked a bit too pale, she would spend 3 days obsessing over the color, darkening it until it was heavy and dull. If someone noted that a crane looked too stiff, she would spend a week trying to make it fluid, until the paint began to crack under the weight of her edits. She was living in an echo chamber of other people's voices, her own creative spark dimmed by the constant need to please an audience that was never satisfied. She believed that her worth was tethered to the feedback she received, and as a result, her lanterns, once vibrant and light, became elaborate, overly decorated, and fragile. She was no longer painting to capture the spirit of the crane or the lotus. She was painting to avoid the sting of a critique. Her studio was filled with half-finished silk panels, each one discarded because a neighbor had suggested the composition felt unbalanced or out of fashion. One sweltering summer afternoon, an elderly hermit who lived in a hut on the outskirts of the village stopped by her stall. He was not a craftsman, but he possessed a gaze that felt unnervingly steady. He watched as she frantically tried to adjust a hanging lantern to suit a group of tourists who had complained about its height. The hermit walked up to her, his movements slow and rhythmic, and he looked at the lantern, then at her. He asked her, "If you stopped painting to hear what they say, would you still remember what you wanted to see?" She was taken aback, her brush trembling in her hand. She told him that if she didn't listen to them, she would lose her reputation, her business, and her place in the village. The hermit didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small, plain wooden box. He set it on her work table and told her to open it. Inside was not a tool, but a piece of polished, clear glass. A simple lens salvaged from a broken spyglass. He told her to look through it at her own lantern, but to hold the glass at arm's length. She peered through the lens. Because of the way the glass was curved, it blurred the details of her intricate, overpainted work, turning the entire lantern into a single glowing orb of color. The harsh lines she had labored over disappeared. The fussy decorations vanished. What remained was the pure, luminous spirit of the light itself. The hermit whispered that the people who criticized her were looking at the brushstrokes, but the light itself had no brushstrokes. The light was just light. He asked her to try one experiment. He told her to take one of her rejected silk panels, one that she had abandoned because the colors were wrong, and paint it exactly as she felt the spirit of the morning, not as she felt the villagers would demand. He told her that for one full day, she was to treat the villagers' opinions as if they were merely wind blowing through the trees, noticed perhaps, but never invited into the studio. The transformation did not happen in a thunderclap. The next morning, as she sat down to paint, the old panic rose. She felt the phantom pressure of the village voices telling her to make the crane larger, to make the blue deeper. But this time, instead of following the impulse, she paused. She put the brush down, closed her eyes, and breathed until the urgency in her chest subsided. She recognized the echo for what it was, an old habit of trying to be safe by being compliant. She breathed into the tightness, and she allowed the voices to be there, swirling around her like dust in a shaft of light. While she kept her focus on the silk, she painted a simple, unadorned branch. She used a color of green that she loved. Even though she knew it wasn't the popular shade of the season, she worked with her hands steady, and for the first time in a decade, she did not look toward the village square to see if anyone was watching. When the lantern was finished, it looked different than anything she had ever produced. It was bold, it was quiet, and it was entirely her own. She hung it in her stall, and when a woman came by and told her that the green felt a bit strange, the painter did not feel the usual collapse of her heart. She felt a quiet, grounded amusement. She smiled, thanked the woman, and continued working on the next panel. She hadn't become a master of the world. She still cared about her lanterns, and she still wanted to be kind to her neighbors. But the internal wall of the echo chamber had finally been breached. She had stopped trying to curate her identity through the eyes of others. She realized that the painting was not for the critics, it was an act of witnessing the beauty she saw in her own mind. She had found a subtle, profound liberation in the act of being misunderstood. It was no longer a burden, it was the price of being herself. This is the deeper transformation we are reaching toward tonight. It is the realization that your internal audience, those voices of parents, teachers, critics, and past versions of yourself, does not need to be evicted by force. You don't have to win an argument with them. You only need to stop giving them the brush. You only need to start painting your own life with the colors you actually see, rather than the colors you think the world expects of you. The voices will still be there sometimes, drifting through your awareness like a passing breeze, but you can acknowledge them and continue your work. You can be the painter, the musician, the witness of your own existence, and that is enough to make the room feel spacious again. As you lie here, let the image of that painter settle into your awareness. Think of the things you have been policing in your own life because you fear the judgment of someone who isn't even in the room. You have been painting your days in colors that don't belong to you, trying to craft a version of yourself that is safe from the echoes of the past. But you are safe to be the original. You are safe to be the one who decides what is beautiful, what is meaningful, and what is true. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be honest. The room is wide, the window is open, and the wind is blowing through the temple. You are the space where the beauty happens, and you are finally allowed to rest in the quiet, unjudged center of your own life. Everything you need to be is already here, waiting beneath the layers of performance, in the simple, steady rhythm of your own breath. The night is deep, and the echoes are fading into the vast, dark sky, leaving you in a silence that is finally, mercifully your own. It is often the most quiet, persistent ache, the secret belief that if you were only a bit more vigilant, a little more observant, or a shade more controlled, you could finally dismantle the echo chamber of your own mind. You have lived in the shadow of this internal audience for so long that it has begun to feel like your own personality. You believe your exhaustion is simply the inevitable price of being a conscientious person. You believe your anxiety is just evidence that you care. But notice right now, in the stillness of this hour, how much of your internal landscape is defined by this constant, low-level effort to manage the uncontrollable feedback of your own thoughts. The mind possesses a remarkable, yet exhausting, capacity to construct a fortress out of its own reactions. When life brings a challenge, a disappointment, a moment of uncertainty, a sharp word from another, or a sudden unexplained fear, this is the first pain. It is the raw, unavoidable impact of living in a world that is always in motion. You cannot prevent these moments. They are as natural as the wind that rushes through an open temple window, or the dust that dances in a shaft of light. But the mind, in its attempt to protect you, almost instantly reaches for the udders. It begins to seal the room, bracing the walls, and monitoring every vibration, labeling it, dissecting it, and eventually blaming you for it. This is the second pain. It is not the event itself, but the way your mind refuses to let the event simply be. You turn a moment of social awkwardness into an identity of unlovability. You turn a moment of career uncertainty into a narrative about your own fundamental inadequacy. You try to fix the future by rehearsing every possible mistake you might make, believing that if you just anticipate enough, you will be prepared. This is the mechanism of resistance. It is the belief that if you stay tight, if you stay tense, and if you keep policing the resonance of your own mind, you will be safe. But you are not being safe. You are only being tired. Buddhist wisdom asks us to look at this process with a softness that we rarely afford ourselves. It does not suggest that you are wrong for reacting this way. It only suggests that you are suffering from a misunderstanding of your own role. You have been treating the thoughts that arise in your mind as if they were personal failings, or even worse, as if they were the fundamental truth of who you are. When a thought of regret emerges, you do not see it as a passing sound wave. You see it as a permanent mark against your character. When a thought of worry emerges, you do not see it as a fluctuation of the air. You see it as a warning that you are failing to provide for your own security. This is why the second pain grows so deep. It feeds on the belief that you are the architect of your own experience, and therefore, every ripple in the air is a flaw in your design. But what if you were to consider that your worth is not found in the acoustics of your internal chamber? What if you were to consider that the moments when your mind feels most crowded, most anxious, most erratic, most filled with the voices of others, are not moments of failure, but simply moments of being human? We often confuse control with safety because it feels like something we can actually do. When we are scared, our hands want to find something to grasp. We check our phones for validation. We replay conversations to see where we might have performed better. We fixate on the future, and we audit our pasts. These are all attempts to find firm ground in a reality that is constantly changing. But the more you try to solidify your life through control, the more you become brittle. You become like a window frame that has been painted shut to keep the weather out, and in the end, it is the rigid structure that denies you the very air you need to breathe. Peace is not the absence of these difficulties. Peace is not a state where the echo chamber is always soundless and the mind is always still. Peace is the capacity to sit within the difficulty without adding the second wound of self-reproach. It is the ability to feel the stinging shame of a mistake without deciding that you are fundamentally broken. It is the ability to notice the worry without deciding that you are in immediate danger. This is a profound shift in relationship. A movement from being the judge of your own resonance to being the witness of it. Think of how much of your energy is spent trying to reconcile your inner world with a version of reality that exists only in your own expectations. You want to be at peace, but only on the condition that the world and your mind behave a certain way. But the Buddhist perspective invites you to reverse this. It invites you to find peace in the reality that is already here, with all its messiness, its unpredictability, and its wild, uncurated sounds. This does not mean you abandon your responsibilities or stop caring about your life. It means you stop turning your care into a prison. When you feel that familiar pull to judge yourself for your own internal state, pause. Breathe into that tightness in your chest. Notice the reflex. Acknowledge that it comes from a place of wanting to be okay. And then, for a single moment, choose not to follow it. Do not fight the judgment. Do not try to silence it by force. Just hold it in your awareness, like a sound that is fading into the distance. See it for what it is, a protective habit, a piece of old armor you no longer need to wear. You might find that when you stop feeding the second pain, the first pain becomes much easier to carry. The reality of life's challenges still exists, but they lose their sharp, stinging edge when they are no longer being amplified by your own self-judgment. You stop turning your life into an audition to be perfected. You start living it as an experience to be felt. This is the difference between a life lived in defense and a life lived in presence. It is a slow, quiet work to dismantle the habit of self-judgment. It does not happen in an instant, and it is not something you achieve once and for all. It is a practice you return to, over and over. Whenever you notice yourself reaching for the tools to seal the windows again, you will reach for them. That is the nature of the mind. But each time you notice, each time you feel the phantom weight of the lock in your hand and choose to leave it open, you are growing in a different kind of strength. You are growing in the strength of understanding. Many of the things you fear, the loss of control, the feeling of being behind, the discomfort of not being seen, are not actually enemies of your peace. They are simply parts of the human landscape. When you stop fighting them, you stop being exhausted by them. You may find that your mind is still busy, that thoughts still come and go, and that your heart still feels the weight of the world. But you are no longer adding the extra burden of should. You are no longer holding yourself hostage to the idea that you must be someone other than who you are in this moment. Rest in this recognition. Let it settle into your bones. You have been carrying the weight of the temple on your shoulders, believing that if you ever let go, the echoes would overwhelm you. But the temple is not your enemy, and the wind is not your failure. It is just part of the world, and you, standing in the middle of it all, are the witness who allows it all to be. You do not need to solve this. You do not need to understand it completely tonight. You only need to be the one who sits in the center of the space and watches the evening turn. As the second wound finally begins to heal from the simple, honest act of being met with kindness, the night is deepening and the echoes are fading into the vast open expanse of the sky, leaving you in a stillness that is finally, mercifully your own. This wisdom is not intended to be locked away in a temple or kept for those moments when you are sitting in meditation. It is meant for the very moments when your life feels the most cluttered. It is meant for that Tuesday morning when you find yourself checking your phone for the 5th time, waiting for a message that you believe will finally validate your presence or settle your nerves. That impulse to reach for digital reassurance is just like trying to force the air back into a flute. It is a reflex born of the fear that if you are not constantly managing the external signals, you will be forgotten or left behind. In that moment, you do not have to put the phone down to practice the lesson. You only have to notice the tightening in your hands, the way your grip has become sharp and demanding. You only have to recognize that your desire for confirmation is not the same thing as the truth of your worth. You can breathe, acknowledge the ache of waiting, and choose to let the air pass through the instrument without needing to force a specific sound. Think of those long, restless nights when your mind begins to replay a mistake you made weeks or even years ago. You are lying in the dark, your body tired, but your thoughts are busy reenacting the same scene, trying to find a better ending. You are convinced that if you just analyze the interaction one more time, if you just find the perfect wording you should have used, you will finally achieve the quiet you crave. But closure does not come from the perfection of the past. It comes from the willingness to admit that the moment has already slipped into history. When you find yourself in this loop, you are essentially standing in the center of your temple, trying to capture the notes that have already drifted out the window. Instead of fighting the memory, try to feel the physical sensation of the shame or the regret. Do not make it a story about who you are. Just make it a sensation in your body, a warmth, a heaviness, a tightness. By observing the physical feeling rather than the intellectual story, you are already stepping away from the walls that echo back the pain. You are letting the sound fade, and in doing so, you are allowing yourself to finally rest in the dark. It is also for those times when you are sitting in a room full of people, perhaps participating, while feeling an immense heavy weight inside that no one else can see. You are afraid that if you stop performing, if you stop keeping the temple walls sealed to maintain your reputation, others will see the wildness of your anxiety and judge you for it. But this too is a form of control. It is the belief that your inner peace is a public responsibility. You can care for others, you can be present for them, and you can still allow your own inner world to be unsealed and vulnerable. You do not have to be a polished, finished product to be worthy of belonging. You are allowed to be in the middle of your own growth, even if that growth looks messy or uncertain to the rest of the world. When you feel the heavy guilt that comes with needing to rest, recognize it as the voice of the audience member who thinks they have the right to demand your constant attention. You do not have to earn your right to breathe. You do not have to earn your right to be still. The mountain does not earn its peace, it simply occupies it. You can do the same. If your mind tells you that you are falling behind, or that others are further ahead, or that you have not achieved enough to justify a quiet moment, tell yourself that these are just reflections of the echoes. They are not laws. They are not instructions for how you must live your life. They are just vibrations that have bounced off the stones of your past. You can watch them vibrate without feeling obligated to agree with them. Practice this in the small moments of your day. A single breath before you answer an email is a form of profound wisdom. A moment of pause before you react to an unkind word is a way of saying that you are not going to be ruled by your own defensive reflexes. You are not trying to change the world. You are trying to be someone who is no longer at war with the resonance of it. You are trying to become a person who can witness the noise of modern life without needing to become the noise yourself. There will be days when you forget. There will be days when you find yourself deep in the chamber, desperately trying to lock the windows again, convinced that the wind will tear your life apart. That is not a sign that you have failed. That is just the habit of the mind. It is a long-standing pattern that has served you in the past, even if it has cost you your peace. Do not judge yourself for being back in the habit. Simply notice the weight of the iron key in your hand. Feel the tension in your fingers. And then, with the same gentleness you would offer a tired friend, set the key on the floor. You can always start again. You can always look at the unsealed window. You can always remember that you are the space, not the echo, and that the light that shines on you is the same light that shines on everything else, indifferent to whether your melody is perfectly tuned or whether you are simply, beautifully, humanly breathing. Take a breath and feel how your life opens up when you stop demanding that every thought be a masterwork. You have spent so much energy trying to justify your existence through your ability to maintain a pristine internal acoustics, but the acoustics were never the point. The point was the music that was happening while you were busy trying to control it. You are here now. You are safe. The world is continuing its turning, and you are not required to hold it steady. You are only required to be present, to witness the wind, and to breathe with the quiet, steady rhythm of the night. This is not a task for tomorrow. This is the practice for this very moment, as you drift toward a rest that no longer needs to be earned, but only allowed. You have been carrying the weight of an audience for so long that you have forgotten how light you are without it. Every time you catch yourself performing, every time you catch yourself reviewing your words to see if they were right, see if you can just smile at the reflex. It is a very human thing to want to be understood, but you do not need to be understood by everyone to be at peace. You only need to be honest with yourself. When you let go of the need for an external mirror, you find that the room becomes much larger. It becomes a place where you can sit and do nothing, where you can think and let it pass, where you can feel and let it soften, without any of it ever being a final judgment on your worth. This is the freedom of an unsealed heart. It is the peace of knowing that you are already whole, and that the only thing you ever had to do was to stop sealing the windows to the present moment. Stay in this awareness a little longer, feeling the air move through you, and know that you are finally beginning to see the sky. The mountain air has finally stilled within the chamber, the last echoes of the day fading into the ancient stone, as the light of the moon begins to silver the floor. You have spent so long bracing yourself against the sound of your own life, believing that you were the architect of the resonance, that you were responsible for tuning every vibration. But as the shadows lengthen and the temple grows cold, you can feel the heavy iron key resting uselessly on the floor, its purpose dissolved by the simple, radical act of letting the window remain unlatched. The wind no longer needs to be feared or curated. It is just the world breathing, and you are finally breathing with it. Let your fingers uncurl, releasing the memory of the flute and the phantom weight of the work you thought you had to finish. Your body, already softening into the support beneath you, is finding its own way back to the silence. Notice how the breath moves not because you are commanding it, but because the stillness is breathing through you. In and out, deep and slow. The rhythm is not something you have to police. It is a gift you have been carrying all along. Every inhale is an invitation to inhabit the space you have revealed. Every exhale is a release of the need to be observed, audited, or approved. There is a velvet darkness now that covers the cliffside and the temple alike, erasing the sharp lines of the walls that once caused you so much worry. The chamber is still there, with its stone and its history and its long memory of echoes. But it is no longer something you are responsible for polishing. It is simply part of the mountain. It is part of the world that exists outside of your self-critique. And you, in your quiet, unburdened heart, are finally free to stop looking at it with a critical eye. You can be the witness to the silence, the one who watches the moon shift across the temple floor without needing to label the dust, or the light, or the depth. Feel the weight of your eyelids, soft and heavy like silk falling across the surface of a still pond. The desire to provide a perfect performance has faded, leaving behind a lightness that allows you to drift. There is nothing to prove tonight. There is no audience waiting for a final word, and there is no ledger that needs to be balanced before you close your eyes. All the things you thought required your constant, vigilant attention are, in truth, already held by the turning of the earth, the sky, the stones, the cycle of the seasons. They continue their work without you needing to guide them. And so, you can leave your own work aside. You can let the window remain wide open to the night. This rest is not a desertion of your presence. It is the ultimate return to your own nature. By finally setting down the labor of the audition, you are allowing yourself to be nourished by the stillness you once thought was empty. The fear of being unobserved, the fear of losing your reputation, has transformed into a profound sense of homecoming. You are the space where the music happens. You are the stillness where the wind gathers. You are the chamber, and the night is the air. And they are flowing into each other until there is no longer a place where you end, and the calm begins. Let the last remnants of your vigilance go. If a thought about the past should wander by, let it pass like a leaf drifting over a temple roof. Do not reach for it. Do not try to analyze its shape. Simply notice it, and then watch it dissolve into the infinite, velvet quiet. You have done enough by simply being present, by walking the path, by unsealing the window, and by choosing to trust that the life you are living is honest without needing to be polished for a ghost. The mountain is beneath you, broad and steady. The dark is around you, soft and protective. And the breath in your chest is the only rhythm you need to follow as you descend into the deep, unmeasured ocean of sleep. Everything that has been heavy will find its own place to rest, as the moonlight illuminates a chamber that no longer requires a master, dissolving at last into a profound and velvet darkness. If the peace you have been searching for was never a sound you had to create through effort, but the quiet, open space that was waiting for you to finally stop performing, what would happen if you dared to hear the silence without rushing to fill it with a song?